Question number 3, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, this question is to the Prime Minister and asks, can he tell us all again about the so-called rock star economy and his policies to maintain it?
And before I call the Prime Minister, my officers have been advised the answer may be slightly longer than normal. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It sure will. Mr. Speaker, I have never described the economy as a rock star. That was HSBC economist Paul Bloxham who reaffirmed that view once again in March of this year. But I'm happy to take the member through some of the positives in the economy and, of course, the policies to maintain it, as he asked of me. So here we go. We've reformed labour laws, including introducing the 90-day probation period. That's helped contribute to 69,000 more jobs in the last year and 200,000 since 2011. That flexibility in the labour market, Mr. Speaker, has helped average wages go up now to over 57,000, 10,000 more since National came in office in 2008. Every single year, Mr. Speaker, we've increased the minimum wage, and that's helped those workers in the workplace. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we've got on top of public spending and increased public services. The books have gone from an $18.4 billion deficit, Mr. Speaker.
Order. 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 In case the front bench of the National Caucus hadn't noticed, there's a point of order has been called.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like some further clarification from you. The standing orders require that answers are terse and to the point, and that you can vary that where there is a technical answer that does require a more detailed explanation. I would perhaps like you to elaborate to the House as to why you feel that that is something that actually is technical or detailed in nature that requires that level of attention of the House.
I'll hear from the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to differentiate my point of order with my colleague from the Labour Party, but I'm moving an extension of time because that can't be it.
Order, 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 order. I want to comment on the point raised by Chris Hipkins. It is a situation when I look at the question, and it's almost asking us to say it again, that I accepted the call from the Prime Minister that the answer would be longer than normal. It is getting to the stage very shortly where I intend to curtail the answer. I will give the Prime Minister a brief opportunity to conclude his answer.
Hey, Mr. Speaker, well, I have 3 pages of material and I'm only halfway through page 1, but let's please carry on for as long as the Speaker deems fit, of course, Mr. Speaker. So, yes, we've got public spending in order, gone from an $18.4 billion deficit to hopefully a surplus very soon. Mr. Speaker, my own portfolio, we've invested more in tourism. Last week we welcomed the 3 millionth tourist.
No. Now I have heard enough. Supplement. Point of order, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table all these wonderful policies and Mr. Peters would like to have them.
Order. Leave us. No. Order. Order. On the basis the Prime Minister advised he had a longer answer than normal. There's been objection to the length of it and I think it's gone on for long enough. I'm going to accept the to put the leave and it'll be over to the House to decide. Oh, the source I should just check with the Prime Minister.
The source is my office.
Leave us put. It's over to the House. Leave us sought to table the rest of the answer. Is there any objection? There is objection. Order.
Question.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Good try. Further question to the Prime Minister. Can he tell the House about his record-breaking performance in regard to debt, where he has taken net government debt from $10 billion to up almost to 7 times that figure, or $70 billion, and still rising?
Mr. Speaker,
the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm actually glad the member raised the issue of debt because when we came into office, Mr. Speaker, the advice we had from the Treasury was that if we carried on with all of the policies we were inheriting from the previous Labor government, which were unfunded, by the early 2020s, debt to GDP would be 60%. We know from the last budget it's approximately 26%. Under the economic leadership of this government, New Zealanders have $100 billion of less debt than they otherwise would have, Mr. Speaker. No wonder that member's in opposition.
Supplementary question, Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Can the Prime Minister tell this House which of his budget deficits was his rockstar favourite? 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014 or 2015?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we'll have to wait and see whether the budget this year for the last financial year actually produces a surplus or a deficit. Mr. Speaker, yes, actually, the government has borrowed money, and that's to keep New Zealanders through those very difficult conditions we inherited with the global financial crisis and standing behind the people of Christchurch. Mr. Speaker, I didn't see a single political party after the Christchurch earthquakes get up and say, abandon the people of Christchurch. But it has cost about $16.5 billion to do that. Same thing.
Order. Supplementary question, the Right Honourable.
Could the Prime Minister tell us how satisfied he is with his performance since under his watch there are now 54,000 more people unemployed than there were when he took power, and whether, like debt, he intends to set a new record there too?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since early 2011, over 200,000 New Zealanders are in work that weren't in that case. Yes, the population slightly higher, but Mr. Speaker, I think if you go and ask any Australian whether they think the New Zealand economy is doing pretty well, you might find that they say it is. And one of the reasons the member could do that if he wanted to get out of his office is because actually there's lots and lots of them coming over to New Zealand because they see the economic fortunes of New Zealand stronger than Australia. I reckon that's testament to pretty good economic performance.
Order. Supplementary
question.
Supplementary question, the Right
That guy
Honourable
get drunk on a
Winston
wine
Peters.
biscuit. Supplementary question, Speaker. Can I ask the Prime Minister how satisfied is he with his performance since under his watch manufacturing as against GDP has gone from 33% and is now heading towards 26% on all forecasts, and exports against GDP are declining as well?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy with the performance of the manufacturing sector. The government doesn't take credit for all of that, but the PMI index has expanded 34 months in a row. Mr. Speaker, my performance is okay. The performance I'm worried about is for the member for Northland, who promised 4 officers, hasn't delivered one yet.
Order.
And if on the third...
Order. Order. The Prime Minister resume his seat.
Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, I know this is a very sensitive...
Order.
Point of order.
Order. Order.
Point of order, Speaker.
Point of order.
I know this is a very sensitive issue, but the Prime Minister began that vein in his first answer today, and he's back doing it again, and he hasn't been admonished or told to apologise or leave the House. No, he keeps on doing it, and he's telling porkies.
Order. And that's not a point of order, and nor is it helpful to the order of the House, and nor is it helpful... Order. And nor is it helpful for the Prime Minister to continue in his vein with his answers. As soon as he does, I've shut him up on both occasions. The Right Honourable Winston Peters, supplementary question.
Yeah, well, I can't fit in it. You can't take it, don't dish it up.
Order. Just ask your supplementary
Supplementary question, Speaker. This of the Prime Minister. Why does he think...
Order. Member, I now have a point of order from the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I think that comment by Mr. Peters can't go left unchecked in Parliament. If we're going to start getting into calling people names like 3-year-olds, I really think we're losing the plot in this House.
Order. I didn't hear the interjection from the Right Honourable Winston Peters. He was certainly responding to interjections were coming from my right-hand side. The House needs to settle, otherwise I will be asking some member to leave question time today. Supplementary question, Right Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, to the Prime Minister. Why does he think that flooding New Zealand... Yeah, well, Donald's got hair like you. Why does he think that flooding New Zealand with net immigration now... Order.
This is the very last warning I'm giving to 2 members on the front bench, Mr. Brownlee and Mr. Joyce. Now, would the member please start his question
Thank you, Mr.
again?
Speaker. You've been most kind. To the Prime Minister, why does he think that flooding New Zealand with net immigration now at almost 60,000 per annum in some sort of consumptive binge is going to help New Zealand's productive export economy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member started the question in question time today, basically by trying to say that the HSBC analysis of the New Zealand economy was somehow wrong. Well, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why the New Zealand economy has performed well over the last 7 years is because this government has taken an international view to the way the economy should operate and function. That's included making sure that we actually do welcome tourists to New Zealand. We do welcome people who want to come and study in New Zealand. We do want to welcome migrants to New Zealand. We do want to have free trade agreements with other countries. Mr. Speaker, the member seems to want a high-growing economy, but he wants to put a massive wall around New Zealand and have no one coming and no one going. What a joke.
Question number 4, Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister